Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and welcome to our Build Your Career webinar series. My name is Michelle Fawn, and I manage our education and professional certification products and services here at the IEEE Computer Society. Each month, we will be hosting on vital business skills that will help you excel throughout your career. Topics covered include communication and presentation skills, interviewing tips, personal branding, effective writing, tips to improve your outside-the-box thinking, and more. Before we get started, I would like to address some housekeeping tasks. The recording of this webinar has started. You can ask any question in the Q&A panel. Our speaker, Adam, will answer as many questions as he can following his presentation. In a few days, you will receive an email with instructions to access both the presentation slides and recording on demand. Today's webinar is on Lead Yourself First. This webinar focuses on leading self, the first step in leader development. This introduction to the leadership illustrates how each of these topics prepares one to take the next step in leadership to leading others. Participants can expect to walk away with a better understanding of how to structure their own leadership development goals. Joining us today is Adam Schmidt, CEO and Principal Coach at Smart Summit Coaching, LLC. Adam has more than 15 years of leadership and consulting experience. He has an exceptional ability to guide others to overcome obstacles. Adam is an International Coaching Federation and professional certified coach. With that being said, Adam, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle. I really appreciate the kind introduction. It's great to be with you today. Talking to you today from beautiful Detroit, Michigan, where it's not too hot. I know many of you on the East Coast of the United States are scorching right now. And Michelle, I'm not sure how it is on the West Coast, but presumably a little better than Washington. I was reading an article today that said it was about a heat index of like 109 in Washington. So I hope everyone is staying cool wherever you are and also enjoying the summer even in these unique times. And we're going to talk today a little bit about what it's like to lead yourself in these unique times. You know, today is a moment to be really selfish. I'd like to offer you the opportunity to spend the next 45 or 50 minutes with us thinking just about you. It's not often that we have the opportunity to reflect on our own strengths, weaknesses, desires, and character, and how they apply in our leadership lives. So I'll invite you to join me today in just thinking about you. I know only maybe 30 or 40 feet from here, I've got a 3-year-old. Another few feet down the hallway is my wife, also working. I've got a lot of family across the country and around the world, and I'm very thoughtful about all of them all the time. But today, for this moment, for these 45 minutes, I'd encourage you just to think about you. And we're going to do some reflection work today. And so as we go through the presentation, we're going to do a few polls. We're also going to do a little bit of self-paperwork. So if you have something laying around, just a regular piece of paper, or maybe a journal that you work in, even a sticky note could work if you've got really small handwriting. We're actually going to do a little bit of work today together, even though there's quite a few of us, and see if we can make some commitments and do a little bit more in the space of self-leadership. Before we get started, I'd like to run a single poll here, and it'll pop up for you in just a minute or so. This poll is going to be about the space of leadership that you are in today. Now, before clicking too quickly, I'll just kind of give you a quick rundown while you review this list. Now, leading others is a space we often call managers. It's also something like a team leader, where you're leading other people who are not in themselves leaders. Usually we associate the word project with this. So if you're a project leader, this might be a manager space or a leading other space. One level up from that is leading other leaders. We often attach the word program to that. So if you're the director of a program, or maybe the senior manager is sometimes a word that we associate with leading other leaders. Third, we have leading organizations. So we're now moving into the senior director or vice president space. And then finally, leading institutions. That's often the C-suite, a president, maybe an executive director for nonprofits. This could also be board members if you're guiding or leading institutions. And what I'd like to do today is just have you let me know kind of where we stand. Let me know kind of where you are in this space, so that based on this poll, I'm going to tweak the areas I focus on a little more or a little less today to make sure that we kind of zero in on what's most important. So take just 30 seconds or so and select which of these is most relevant to your space now. Leading others, leading other leaders, leading organizations, or leading institutions. And just 5 or 10 more seconds before I go to the next slide, and we'll kind of take a look at where we are. Thank you so much. This is super helpful, and you'll all be able to see these in just a few seconds as the results kind of work their way through the webcast system here. Far and away, 80% of you leading others, often called managers, so thanks for that. And leading other leaders, about 15%, and a couple leading organizations at 6%. Hugely helpful for me today, so thanks for that. And also just noticing today that we've got folks who are on the earlier end of their leadership journey, and what a moment to think about what leading self means for you. On this first slide, I just wanted to underpin the fact that leading self is a part of every stage of leader development. There was a leadership development expert named Peter Drucker, and this is Peter's breakdown of how leaders grow in their career and how leaders progress. You just selected which stage that you're in Peter Drucker's model. Leading others, leading leaders, leading organizations, and leading institutions. Regardless of where you are in your leadership journey, leading self is a huge part of who you are as a leader every day, whether it's for a small project team of 3 people, whether it's as an executive director for IEEE with 1,000 people. Leader development begins with leading self. If you cannot lead yourself, you will struggle at every level of leadership. Leading self has a tremendous amount to do with demonstrating self-awareness, accurate assessments of yourself, and managing control of your own attitudes and belief systems. A self-awareness that lets you understand not only what you believe and what your character is, but how those manifest in the workplace. Leading self focuses on a better understanding of yourself so you can be a more effective and inspiring leader. I'm sure many of you have either read books or seen webinars or maybe some of those short videos on LinkedIn that talk about how to influence people and how to inspire people. In every one of those videos, whatever trick or trait they're sending or sharing with you is directly related, can be traced back to leading self. You have to understand and appreciate your strengths and weaknesses before you're able to engage in the business of inspiration and influence of others. We know as followers, all of us at some point have been followers in our life. We know what it feels like to be led by someone who has not done the hard work of discovering who they are and discovering what it means to lead themselves first. If we've got a manager in the leading other space who has not done the hard work of leading themselves, we might see that manifest as not taking on some of the hard tasks, delegating everything away from them. We might see it as having difficulty giving feedback, only being empathetic, only being appreciative of work, even when it needs correction. There's a wonderful feedback model that I'll mention very quickly as a tangent and just kind of sketch this name down on the side, called Radical Candor. Radical Candor is a model for feedback that has a tremendous amount to do with understanding yourself. Radical Candor feedback means we challenge directly and care personally at the same time. If we have not done the hard work of understanding ourselves and leading ourselves first, we'll struggle to lead with radical candor because we are not confident enough to challenge directly, and we are not in tune with our own emotions and how to display those belief systems and attitudes correctly to care about others personally. I'm sure all of us on this call have at some point received feedback from someone who is not really ready themselves to provide feedback. And for that reason, it might have felt inauthentic. It might have felt unhelpful. And so today we're going to do a deeper dive into the tenets of leading self and think a little bit about some of the commitments you can make to improve in this space. I'll offer for today's purposes that there are 4 pillars of leading self: understanding your strengths, appreciating your weaknesses, clearly identifying your values and character, and finally, understanding your desires, that is, where you're going. What we'll do in today's webinar is walk through each one of these pillars, talk a little bit about why they're important, what they are, sort of define them, talk about key takeaways, and then specific commitments you can make, either through reading, research, an assessment, or self-reflection, on a way to take a step forward in each of these 4 areas. In order to help you do that a little bit better, and in a few moments your screen will populate with this is what I'd like you to draw on that piece of journal paper or just a notebook you have laying around. Again, even a sticky note will do. Whatever you've got on your desk, or even a book sketch in your laptop or tablet, if that's what you're working on today. I'd like you to make a quad chart on your paper and just identify the following quadrants: strengths, weaknesses, values, and desires, the 4 tenets of leading self. In each of those quadrants, write the words reflection and commitment. Because again, as we go through each one of these, I'd like you to just do a little self-noticing about these 4 areas, and then a small commitment about a way that you might be able to move the needle in the next few months on that particular tenet of leading self. Just take about 30 seconds and create that quad chart for yourself before we move on. Strengths, weaknesses, values, and desires. So we'll begin our discussion today with strengths, the first of the 4 pillars. Strengths, as you probably know, are things you can leverage. They're things that can push you further. Strengths are things that people have called you by for a very long time. I remember growing up, people would say things like, Adam, you should be a teacher, or Adam, you should do this, or you should do that. Reflect for a moment on what people have told you you're good at. Reflect for a moment on what others have told you about your strengths. Typically, a personal strength is something that comes naturally for you. It might be something that you qualify as a blessing. You might have heard it called a natural gift. If someone has shared with you you're very gifted at this or that, they're talking about one of your strengths. Knowing your strengths means that you know what activities to engage in. It'll allow you to shine in that space. Strengths, and we'll finish this analogy in a little bit. When I work with folks one-on-one, we talk a lot about strengths as a spice rack. I know that doesn't make any sense at all right now, but stay with me for 1 second on this. I love to cook. I'm a huge fan of completely messing up recipes and creating miserable dishes and then trying again and hopefully getting a little bit better at it. So I don't admit that cooking is a strength. But one day when I was thinking about how do I convey the importance of strengths and how to use them, we need to make sure that we're kind of thinking about strengths in a way where we can name them, claim them, and aim them. And we do the same things with spices when we cook. We have a certain spice rack in our house. Maybe for you it's in a cabinet. Mine's in a drawer. Maybe they're sort of on the back of your stove. But if we think about these spices, they're typically very potent. They're things that have a very specific flavor, very specific attributes, and we only use them in very delicate amounts in specific dishes to create the flavors we want. Strengths are absolutely no different. I want you to begin thinking about your strength today as a spice rack. What spices are on your countertop that you need to bring into your professional space? We're going to talk a little bit in weaknesses about some of the risks of overusing spices, but for the moment, just consider what is in my spice rack. What are some of the strengths that I bring to the table that are unique to me? Let's take a moment in this upper left quadrant and conduct our reflection, and it doesn't need to be a big long sentence or paragraph, just a few words. Again, what have you heard from others about your strengths? What are you known for? What label would you put on that spice, so to speak? In the second part of our discussion on strengths, I want to just share the key takeaway and a couple of ways to grow in this space, and we'll talk about the commitment in a second. Our key takeaway, knowing and understanding and appreciating your strengths allows you to deliver your best with intentional measure on demand. Remember, when it comes to strengths, you need to be able to name it, claim it. That means have confidence in ourselves to execute the strength, and aim it. Name it, claim it, and aim it. Being intentional with our strengths allows us to deliver our best and lead ourselves in moments of even the greatest uncertainty. For your future growth, how do you get better at this? Maybe you're sitting there saying, I'm not really sure. I can't remember what anyone's ever said about me. It's unclear. I have a $15 or $16 miracle, depending on what day you go to Amazon, for a book called StrengthsFinder. StrengthsFinder 2.0 is a wonderful book that provides a very short assessment. Only takes about 20 or 25 minutes. It'll walk you through a series of about 80 questions, and at the end of those 80 questions, it gives you your top 5 strengths and the supporting definitions of those strengths. A quick tip, knowing that a lot of folks on the line are in the early part of their leadership journey and that leading others space, this is a great way to learn how to talk about yourself in things like job interviews, cover letters, resumes. When you get the most difficult question in an interview, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself, Adam? That's a tough question to answer. The StrengthsFinder 2.0 assessment is a great place to start, a great place to learn and build language and lexicon around who you are. So if you're having trouble today identifying what your strengths are, I cannot encourage you enough to take a very inexpensive look at the StrengthsFinder 2.0. The second one I'll recommend is from the VIA Institute. The VIA Institute offers an assessment that also identifies strengths and character attributes. You can go to viacharacter.org. It's actually free, so $15 is outside the budget for the moment. It's understandable. Go to VIA Character and take their assessment. If you have the time and are willing to invest, do both and see what sort of overlap you get. The most important thing we can do with our strengths at this point, especially when you're in the business of leading others and leading leaders, those first two areas of leadership development, knowing and appreciating your strengths where you can name them, claim them, and aim them is critical to your success. Let's take a look now at the second pillar of leading self, weaknesses. And we'll talk a little bit more about my favorite spice rack and my miserable cooking in just a minute. Knowing your weaknesses gives you a clearer understanding of things that might be holding you back. Sometimes we know what our saboteurs are. That is what's sabotaging us. We want to deliver our best, but we have a habit, for example, of always being in a hurry. We have a habit, for example, of wanting to please others at all times. We have a habit of what might be called trying harder, which is the saboteur that tells us as we drive up an icy hill, we just decide to hit the gas and pin it down and let the wheels spin and spin and spin and spin, and we're not getting anywhere. We will try harder no matter what, even if we're not getting anywhere. So understanding our weaknesses, our saboteurs, is a great way to begin understanding, why am I not able to reach my potential? Why am I not able to allow my strengths to shine? Knowing your weaknesses allows you to identify ways to not let your weaknesses disrupt your performance. If we know what our weaknesses are, we can say, this is not a space where I excel. Can someone support me in this area? Asking for help, especially in the leading leaders and leading organizations space, is incredibly powerful. We've moved on from a world that used to appreciate leaders who never asked for help. We've moved on from a world where leaders were not inclusive. We moved on from a world where leaders did not accept diversity of thought. And we find ourselves in a better place now when it comes to leadership. And we see that there is beauty in asking for support and asking for the help that you need to complete tasks, both large and small. If we don't know where our weaknesses are, we'll enter those fogs and those sort of hard to see places, those murky waters where we can't operate effectively. And we'll pretend to the outside world that we're really succeeding when in fact we're not. And of course, sooner or later, as we know, at all levels, whether it's others, leaders, institutions, or organizations, will be found out. And so this moment where we understand our weaknesses is one we can appreciate and invite into our space to say, we know where we do not want to get involved. We know where we need to ask for some help. Watch for overused strengths. I'll refer back to the spice rack here for a minute. I have a habit of over-spicing everything that I cook. It's because I think I like spicy foods, and I wish I could explain it to you all better. I guess I think more spice is better, and I don't listen to myself enough because I always overspice everything, and I'm overusing. Typically, it's those red pepper flakes. You probably don't know what I'm talking about. They sit on my counter because I don't even put them away in the drawer I mentioned before. They sit on my counter, and I put them in almost everything I cook. And then my wife, and especially my toddler, tell me, "No, thank you, Dad. This is not what I was looking for dinner tonight." We have to be careful about how much of our spice, how much of our strength we enter into each equation. We want to be measured and intentional. And when we overuse our strengths, they instantaneously become a weakness. Let's give a few examples to kind of bring some texture to what I'm saying. Let's say one of your strengths, you do the Strengths Finder assessment, and one of your strengths come back as intellectual or academic. If we overuse that intellectual strength too often, we'll find ourselves being labeled as maybe a know-it-all, maybe someone who doesn't accept others' ideas because they think they're by the book wrong, maybe someone who is not so creative if you are tied to an academic approach to things. That's an example of overusing one of your strengths. In my case, one of the strengths that I often overuse is communicator. I love to communicate with people. I love to talk and type and chat and understand more about people's spaces. But unfortunately, when I overuse that strength, I overtalk, and people become exhausted very quickly of whatever story Adam is telling. I always share with folks, I'm a recovering overtalker, probably for 10 years now. I've been working on saying a little less and listening a lot more. So remember that spice rack. Let's do a little reflection here in the weaknesses portion. So in the upper right hand of our quad chart now, what's an area you've received constructive feedback in? Are there any areas where you've received repeated feedback? See if you can name a weakness today. Just take a few seconds to do that. Maybe it's been in an annual review or a mid-year review. Maybe someone's done some on-the-spot feedback after a presentation you gave and said, hey, you know what? I think next time it might be better at this. Maybe you've gotten some feedback about your communication style, your work approach. Think about what weaknesses have showed up for you, and maybe more importantly, what weaknesses others have helped you identify. Let's think about some of the commitments and the takeaway we can make in the area of weaknesses. When we think about leading self in the weakness space, we want to honor our weaknesses. We want to allow ourselves to be aware of them, to take the opportunity to ask for support and seek self-improvement. This is a moment to give yourself permission to have weaknesses, a moment to give yourself permission to say, that's not my strongest point. I need some support here. To further your growth in this area, there is a single stop that I would recommend most to understand more about your weaknesses, and that would be either formal or informal 180 or 360 assessments. 360 assessment, of course, is when we ask our peers, subordinates, and supervisors alike, even sometimes folks who are to the left and right of us. So it could be members of a faith-based community that we're involved with, other clubs or societies, maybe colleagues that you developed within the IEEE Computer Society, to say, hey, will you please fill out this survey? I'm doing a 360 assessment. To get real-time feedback. I've listed one particular assessment on here that's just a personal favorite of mine as a coach, and I call it sort of a prescription strength 360. It's called the Leadership Circle Profile. It's at leadershipcircle.com, and I'd encourage you to take a look at it. Now, the Leadership Circle Profile is not something you can do by yourself. You do need a certified coach in the LCP to execute it, but I would assure you that it's well worth your investment to understand more about where you're coming from. If you're like me, I'm very data-driven, and the formal 360 assessment from Leadership Circle Profile is extraordinarily data-driven. It can include up to 20 participants. It gathers data on 29 different dimensions of your leadership style and compares you not only to your own view of yourself and how you're doing, but it also gives you an assessment and compares you against the over 200,000 leaders who have also taken the assessment to sort of see how you're doing in the larger field of leadership. It's an exceptional tool, and if you're serious and sort of at a level about understanding more about your weaknesses, a formal 360 can be very enlightening. Of course, we all don't necessarily want to go down that road. We don't all need a formal assessment. And Michelle, I was glad to hear before that these slides will be shared because I've actually put a few questions in this slide about how to conduct an informal assessment. You don't need a fancy Leadership Circle profile to understand some basics about your weaknesses and get some informal feedback that's less data-driven, but potentially still as effective as the Leadership Circle profile. You can send out an email or work with a coach to send out an email on your behalf that can do an assessment with just asking some simple questions like, does this leader prioritize the needs of their team and customers? Does this leader motivate others to reach goals? Can you rely on this leader to follow through with their promises and responsibilities? Doing an informal 360 or 180, when I say 180, of course, I'm talking about the lower half of the circle. We usually leave our supervisors out of it and just think about our subordinates. To understand more about what it's like to be a team member on your team, to be a member of your organization or your portfolio, or finally, to be a member of your institution. Let's just jot down in the upper right-hand corner what commitment we'll make to this space. Whether it's a 360, a 180, formal or informal, a little research into what it would be like to do a 360, or finally, do you just want to email a few folks and ask for feedback? It can be as simple as that to begin broadening your perspective on weaknesses. So let's jot down in the upper right-hand corner what your commitment is today to growing a better understanding of your weaknesses. talk about the third tenet of leading self, desires. Not reflecting and documenting your desires invites a life without purpose. It invites a space where we are unclear about what might be ahead. It's unclear what is driving us. It's unclear where we're trying to go. Desire is directly connected to your purpose in life. We have to understand, of course, where we're headed if we're going to be involved with what we're doing today. If we're going to be engaged as a leader, we have to understand where we want to get our team. We have to understand what's at stake if we don't get our team there. Often people fail to reach goals because they don't create the space in their life for action. So in this desire space, we're not only talking about leading ourselves from, I have a career plan in my mind. We're talking about having enough confidence and having enough drive as a leader to set aside time to actually take action towards those desires. As a leadership coach, one of the spaces that I spend a lot of time in is developing diagrams with clients about what their career path might look like, about what their end state might look like. And I'll invite you to do a visualization with me in just a minute in our key takeaways about what that looks like. The reflection for our desire statement. What's a desire you've held for a long time but have yet to get traction on? Similarly, what's important to you about that desire? So I'm in the lower right of my quad chart now with desires. And I'm just going to work on this reflection portion for about 30 seconds or 60 seconds. What's a desire you've held for a long time but have yet to get traction on? What's important to you about that desire? This could be in your personal space. It could be in your professional space. It could be something you haven't articulated yet out loud to someone else. When we're able to begin building language around our desires, they come alive because we're able to share them with others. Our desires, as much as they drive us internally, are only really in service to us if we can share them with others. You know, I'm thinking back onto how I'm sitting in front of you today. It was one of the members of your leadership. I had actually worked with his brother in another platform and, for another organization, and done some similar work with leadership coaching and leading self. And it's in those moments and in those conversations when you share your desire and your passion with someone. I said, I love doing this. This is what I'm meant to do, to talk about how to become better leaders, how to engage and develop ourselves. That energy transfers, that desire carries its own life and begins to travel through a network. And I'm so honored to be with you today to talk about this as a result of sharing my desire and passion with one of the IEEE Computer Society leaders' family members. And that's how I'm in front of you today. So I'd encourage you to not only identify a desire, but begin building language around it so that you're ready to share it with others. When you begin sharing it with others, it might sound something like, you know what really energizes me is ... What I'm really passionate about is ... You know what I really want to do in life is this ... Think through how you might share your desires with others to send that energy into the universe. Let's take a look at some of our key takeaways and how to further your growth in the desire space. Desires move us and shape us. When we know them, we move in that direction. And more often, they move us in their own direction. By simply stating to the world what you want, you'll be amazed at how quickly it comes back to you. I mentioned earlier a visualization, and we'll actually do it just very quickly here. We've got about 7 or 8 minutes before we move into a Q&A. So I'll steal 1 or 2 of those minutes to do a quick visualization. I call this the porch rocking chair visualization. It's a good way to help think through what your desires are. It's also a great way to help you think about what is the best way to make any given decision in your life, whether it's about what job to take or which way to move professionally or anything of that nature. And the visualization goes like this. Close your eyes or soften your gaze, sit back in your chair and get comfortable, and imagine that you're sitting in retirement now. Maybe you're 75, 80 years old, cold glass of lemonade, summer day, the sun is setting, and you're rocking back and forth in this rocking chair on your porch. And you're reflecting on the many different decisions and the many different spaces that you've been through in your life. When you connect with your desires of that future self vision, this is all about connecting with your future self, maybe 30, 40 years from now. What are you most proud of? What is the accomplishment you're most proud of? What is a moment as you reflect on your 75 years of life where you think, that was my authentic self? That's when I was at my best. Many of you may have engineering degrees. Many of you might have technical degrees. And so I'm sure when I use the phrase reverse engineer, that won't be a surprise to anyone. Now, I say that only because I work with a lot of groups that would sort of look at me a little bit crazy when I use that term. But you want to reverse engineer those visions, those moments that I mentioned where you are most authentic, and say, what was the desire that got me to that place? To that moment I was most authentic, to that moment I was most proud of. So back into your desires after doing a little visualizing on what you are most proud of in your life. Was it a desire to become a vice president at a company? Was it a desire to be in service to others through faith? Was it a desire to create and innovate in the technology space? Was it a desire to spread kindness to others? Whatever the case might be, reverse engineer those proud moments from that porch visualization and transition them into clear desires for where you want to head today. The second bullet under further your growth is something we've already discussed. You have to let people around you know what you want to achieve. If we don't share our desires with others, they will not go anywhere. They might drive us internally, but we need support to move forward in our careers. We have to articulate to our colleagues, whether it be in the computer society, at your in your other professional spaces, perhaps at your occupation, in other professional groups, to share, this is what I want. This is what I'd like to do. By telling others, they become our champions. They become our allies in supporting us. And you become their allies when you hear someone. I'm a firm believer that as human beings, we are wired to help one another. I know we don't see a lot of that on the news recently, but I know that if all of us think about our families, our friends, our true friends, our colleagues who have been there for us in challenging professional times and personal times, we know that we would jump to their aid. If a family or friend told us what their desire is, we are hardwired to want to help them achieve that. And we would immediately start going through our sort of mental Rolodex, not necessarily to make a big contact or, help them make a big business deal, but just to think through, what are the strengths that I have? What's in my spice rack that might help this person reach that desire? The final technique I'll mention, and there's a little picture of it here on the slide, is a vision board. A vision board is something you can create very simply using magazines or even just images off the internet. A lot of people just use PowerPoint now or Keynote to make vision boards of their own, a digital vision board. And a vision board, of course, is exactly what it says. Cutting out pictures or identifying images that you think describe what you would like to be. I've got a vision board just to my upper right here in my office that has a couple different images on it. One is someone speaking behind a podium. Another is of a coaching session going on. Another is a cartoon of just two people holding hands, reminding me to partner with those that I'm working with. Creating a vision board allows you to say, that's what I want. That's where I'm headed. And if we keep that in front of us, I think you'll be amazed at how quickly those desires come to fruition. Let's talk about the last tenet of leading self for today, our values. Our values help us make decisions, take action, and focus on moving towards the life we want to live. Our values are our borders. They are the edges of a pool table, as a client told me once. This client in particular was struggling with identifying their values, and he was a big pool player. And he said, values are the things that help bounce us back into play. So he talked a lot about the bumpers around the edge of the pool table. And if we have our values in place and the strength of our values is firm, we can rely on them even in the most difficult times, whether we're leading others, leading leaders, leading institutions, or leading organizations. Our values connect us with the values that boost our decision-making and problem-solving skills. So if we know where our values are, our moral compass lies, decision-making becomes infinitely easier. Our problem-solving skills are guided by a set of values that might include things like trust, loyalty, integrity, kindness, friendship, love, empathy, sympathy. Knowing our values means developing clear opinions. If you find yourself being someone who's often unsure of what their opinion is on a given issue, and we're not talking about politics today, this can be in the professional space, an opinion on how a project is going, an opinion on someone's approach to a project. If you're unclear, if you find yourself often having unclear opinions about what's happening in a given situation, invite yourself to say, maybe I need to work on my values a little bit. And say, what are my core values that are going to guide my decision-making? Values can support your willpower to persevere. This is especially important for those of you who are in the leading leaders and leading organization space. What a moment for us to be visiting this idea of leading self, when so many of us are being challenged as those leading leaders and leading organizations, when revenues are falling, when we have colleagues who might be falling ill, when we have colleagues who are struggling with family members who are falling ill. A moment for us to return to our values and say, why are we in this? And how are we going to get through this together? Let's do a little reflection. And on my quad chart, this will be in the lower left on our values. What's a value you feel you've had since childhood? If you've ever violated that value, how did it feel? This could be a value that you learned from your guardians growing up. This could be a value that you learned from your community. It could be a value that you learned from societies that you've been a part of since a young age, from professors and educators that you've been involved with over the years. What's a value you feel you have held since childhood? And if you can quickly identify that, if you've ever violated that value, my guess is that you actually probably have a clear memory of violating it if it's so ingrained. How did that feel? In our key takeaways for values, we want to understand that values are what you believe are most important in life. Everyone's values are different, but they are what you appreciate the most in life. They are those borders on the pool table, the bumpers on the pool table that can push you back into play. That can make sure you stay on the table and are being true to your authentic self. Here's a couple key takeaways, a few areas that you can further your growth in the value space. The first that I'd recommend, this is another freebie, personal values assessment. You can see it's valuecenter.com. and you can go there and take a free assessment. It provides a wealth of information about why you do what you do. It's not long at all. I took it about a year ago, and I think it took less than 10 minutes. So it says a few, which is from their website, but I'd offer it's probably more in the 6 or 7 minute range. But an easy click away just to discover a little bit more about some of the values that are on your plate. The second I'd recommend, another free one, the Life Values and Inventory, which focuses on individuals and organizations in clarifying their values and serve as a blueprint for decision making. If you're doing any of these or committing to any of these today, and we'll jot down our commitment in lower left quad here, I'd recommend to do the PVA first, the Personal Values Assessment. That's a little more detailed just about you, whereas the Life Values Inventory focuses a little bit more on application of those values in the decision-making process. So I'd put those in chronological order for you today as a recommendation on how to move forward with values. Let's just look in the rearview mirror and do a quick poll. We've talked about the 4 tenets of leading self: strengths, weaknesses, values or character, and desires. Which area do you think you have the most work to do in after reflecting on each one of these today? Which area do you think you have the most work to do in? You might know that by having heard it today and saying, I've never really thought about that. Or I've thought about that, but I don't have enough information. Or I never knew that understanding my values were really a part of who I am as a leader. So what area of leading self do you think you may have the most work to do in? And I'll give you just 20 or 30 seconds to click your response before we move forward. And so looking across the board, we see about half of our folks in the weaknesses area. Always a strong contender when I do this poll. It's not the most fun place to look. It's also the place that's less available or less accessible to understand, because it's not typically something we can just take an online assessment for or buy an inexpensive book for, like strengths, and get really accurate answers for. So for those of you, the nearly 43%, almost half of you, are thinking about your weaknesses, I would strongly encourage you and invite you to think about doing a 180 or a 360 assessment to begin building language around those weakness spots. It is your path forward in your leadership development. And for those of you, a few over a third that are thinking about your desires, to begin capturing where you want to go. Think about that sunset porch visualization I said before. Do it with a glass of Cabernet or whatever your favorite beverage is. I can inspire a little inspiration. Inspire a little inspiration, yeah, if that works. Sit back in your chair tonight, close your eyes, and put yourself on that porch and think about, what are some of the most important decisions I've made over the last 60 years of my career? What are the moments I was most proud of, and what were the desires that got me there? And for those of you in the strengths and values space, encourage you to look more deeply into those simple online assessments. Strengths and values are some of the easier leading self spaces to access, because we can quickly build language using some simple online tools like the PVA and like StrengthsFinder 2.0. So thanks everyone for filling out that poll and just kind of walking with me in that. We'll save 10 minutes for questions. So in just a minute here, I couldn't walk away from today's discussion without talking a little bit about today's environment. Leading ourselves today is more difficult than it was 6 months ago. And our conversation and our tone and our thought process just 6 months ago was very, very different than it is today. We find ourselves in a space where our leadership is being challenged by tremendous uncertainty and what I would call a general sort of sense of unsettlement in many of different spaces, whether it's diversity and inclusion spaces, whether it's our health spaces. Some of the underlying assumptions that many of us as leaders have been operating on have been completely overwhelmed with uncertainty and new ways of thinking. And as much as we invite change, it is always difficult because change does involve loss. It can involve loss on a very personal level. It can involve loss on a professional level, whether it's of a job or new opportunities. It can involve loss for folks who are thinking about going back to school in the fall, who may now be challenged with finding an institution where they can feel like they're being fully engaged. And so as we think about that, I'll offer just 3 quick ideas. Number 1, stick to a routine in this time. One of the best ways to maintain our mental and emotional wellness is have implement and stick to a structured routine where you're taking care of yourself and those around you, taking care of yourself in a very thoughtful and mindful way. Don't forget the basics. Some of the best ways to take care of yourself are very simple: sleep, exercise, and eating healthy foods. I am absolutely guilty of this, my friends. My particular flavor of quarantine satisfaction has been nachos. I have made nachos at least a dozen different ways to try to perfect my recipe while in quarantine, and now in I guess what we would call sort of only modest travel to the most important things. And so we need to take care of ourselves with just the basics. And finally, ask for help when you need it. And this goes back to understanding your weaknesses. Regularly assess your mental and emotional well-being and ask for professional help when you need it. You know, years ago, there was a huge stigma attached to therapy and support and professional support. And I invite you all to join me in the endeavor and in the truth, which is that space does not deserve a stigma. I'm happy to share with you all today that my favorite hour every 2 weeks is meeting with my therapist to talk about what challenges I have and what I think some of my weaknesses are and how I can do better for the next couple of weeks. I'm happy to share that with you because it's an exciting and challenging moment for me to get better. It's no different than going to the gym. I invite you all to think about what support you might need and to join me in the endeavor to reduce the stigma around getting the support that's available. So, Michelle, we'll move into a question phase now here, and I'll do my best to answer all of these. And thank you so much. We've got quite a few coming in, and I'll try to do these as quickly as possible without cutting anyone off. So, will we get a copy of the PowerPoint slides? Yes, Michelle, you can confirm that?
Yes, absolutely.
Excellent, and thank you so much. Some people are very complimentary on here. No one has said how good-looking I am yet, so I'm going to encourage everyone to focus a little bit more on that. But I appreciate the nice comments about the course. Is the presentation going to be available? Yes. No option for not a leader yet. That's a great point. Thank you so much for that. That's right. Today's focus was about kind of the steps of leadership, and that first step is usually in leading self and leading others. So not a leader yet, I would put in the leading self category where you're just focused on you. I didn't put that on the poll. The idea was to underpin how leading self is a component of all of those other spaces of leadership. Let's see here. Adam's video is very small. Thank you for that. I think we might have been able to solve that. Screen image is very small. I hope some of these, Michelle, will be able to correct as we went. Hopefully we're able to see most of the slides.
Yes, the images, the video of you is actually pretty small. So we actually did resolve that, but we'll be able to do that in the next webinar.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And, I'm just seeing some commitments that were entered into here. I'm so appreciative of that. One individual today said they've committed to gain a better understanding of themselves. They're going to email a few people to do an assessment on them, and I invite you to use some of the questions I've got there. It's also very easy to Google. Just say, basic 180 assessment questions or basic 360 questions that you can ask your colleagues. A wonderful way to start highlighting it. And by the way, superiors often love to see that their staff is being so thoughtful about their personal development. And others have also shared some questions, or excuse me, some commitments here too about not jumping to conclusions and hearing people out totally before they talk. So just kind of relating to what's possible in that leading self dynamic. I think, have I seen all the questions? And we'll continue to open the floor here, Michelle, for any others that might come through. There they are. Seeing them pop up now. They're just populating for me here. The survey result is there. So what is the most important of strengths, weaknesses, value, or desires to work with? Excellent question. If I had to pick one of those, I would say attack your weaknesses. We often have an intuition about what our strengths are. Our values often come from childhood, and they're things that we've held dear for quite a long time in our professional space or not. Our desires are typically something that have developed naturally out of our either academic basis or potentially some of our familial space, so in our families, about shared desires in there. But it's the weaknesses portion that we are often least discussed and least sort of brought up, because they are a little bit scarier. So if I could encourage one space that's most important to focus on, weakness would be a great one. And I'm going to keep clicking through. Screenshot of the slides. Thank you for a useful presentation. Let's see here. Let me set better guide millennials facing their own self-image issues. Great question. So the question is this: how do I lead myself to better guide millennials facing their own self-image issues? And I'll just broaden that question briefly, if the author will allow me, to say, how do I guide anyone facing their own self-image issues? And I'd offer this as a starting point. When you meet with them, we have to give a lot of acreage to hear them out and to understand where they're coming from. And I would encourage you to do that by using open, not closed questions. Open questions are when we use how and what. So how are you feeling about that? What might be possible for you in this space? As opposed to saying, does that work for you? Is this a problem for you? Does that meet your expectations? Questions with is or does, which are closed questions, force respondents into an answer. So as the very beginning step to answer your question about how do we talk to people about their own self-image issues, it's most important to use open questions and focus on one in particular, and that is, what is important to you about this topic? What is important to you about the issue that you're raising today, to try to get to their space? Is pandemic a source of interaction problems, or do you think it might be a long-standing underlying surface? Is the pandemic a source? I just want to make sure I understand the question before I answer. I think I understand this question. It is the pandemic a source of interaction problems, so communication problems, or do you think it's been long-standing? The answer is that I think it's been long-standing. If there is one source of interaction problems or challenge from the pandemic, it's simply people learning to communicate virtually. Other communication problems, I'd venture a guess to say it's been around for quite some time, and it's due time to address many of the communication and underlying unconscious biases we have that need to be addressed now. A big picture of the vision board. We talked about it a little. Imagine a giant whiteboard or a bulletin board where you can focus, where you can paste images of everything that you think relates to what you want to be. It doesn't have to be a picture of you. It can be a picture, as I have, of cartoons holding hands, a picture of two random people in a coaching session. What else do I have up here? A picture of a staircase, which helps me remember to try to rise up and see things from a higher level. So it can just be sort of strategic insights too. Slide presentation. Thank you so much. Someone approaching retirement who wants to extend their career into volunteering, any special recommendations? I would just offer that if you understand what we talked about today, leading self doesn't go away after retirement, but maybe some of those annoying job things do. That will be great. I'm looking forward to it as well. Connect with those values and desires, and make sure that whatever volunteering you do matches up just as well as your professional space did with those values and desires. Let your natural strengths shine through in volunteerism. Be extra careful in volunteerism that your strengths don't become weaknesses and you over-offer them. Thank you so much. It was a kind presentation. Copy the slides. Yes. Sometimes a routine is broken. How to regain a routine that is sometimes broken. I know we're at time here, Michelle, but I'll answer this question in our last minute.
Sure, no problem.
Be gentle with yourself about regaining structure. Be gentle with yourself about creating structure. The most dangerous space to go is if you create a structure for yourself, break it once, and then say, I can't do it. It's not true. What we want to think about is just, how do I nudge myself just a little bit more towards where I want to be? Instead of a rigid schedule, you might introduce a couple of principles for the day. It might be something like, eat well and get as much exercise as I can. Notice that those principles aren't a schedule. They're not get up at 5 a.m. every day and go for a run, because that's not sustainable. But if we have just a couple principles, that doesn't mean we can't have the ice cream at night. Absolutely guilty as charged. But we can say to ourselves, you know what? Let me just try to meet my 2 principles today. Exercise, okay. I'm going to walk my daughter to the park instead of driving her. Eat well, okay. For lunch, I'm going to have a salad, but you're crazy if you think I'm not going to have my mint chocolate chip ice cream after my daughter goes to bed. Michelle, I know we've got a few more questions. I defer to you on what's best at this point. I'm happy to try to roll through a few more of them, but I do want to respect others' times today as well.
We can do another minute if that's okay. I mean, I'm fine with that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's see here. Michelle, there's a couple of questions on videos that I'll let you answer. Will this be on YouTube?
Yes, it will. They'll receive a link to it.
Excellent. Okay. How to deal with over-controlling everything. And if the individual is talking about this is a weakness they know about themselves, start incredibly small with something that you think will not even make a difference. So, for example, notice what you over-control. If you over-control, what color ink your staff uses in meetings, see if you can let just that go. Don't think about correcting the entire problem of over-control. Pick one small goal, and then I'd encourage you to find a coach to work with to help you kind of build on that process. In over-controlling, we really focus on 2 key areas. It's the behaviors and the tone. So what behaviors do I try to control, and what tone do I use when I'm over-controlling? And it's those 2 spaces that you'll want to focus on when you work with your coach. Another question on link. Any books you suggest to continue leading ourselves better? I would start with StrengthsFinder. And that's a great place to look into the world of leading yourself a little bit better. There's also a wonderful book called Lead Yourself First by an author named Michael Irwin. Mike Irwin is a friend of mine and actually a classmate from 20 years ago who wrote a book called Lead Yourself First. And Lead Yourself First is a series of stories about very successful people. Dwight Eisenhower comes to mind as one example in the book. And they talk about how those individuals led themselves first before they led everyone. How Dwight Eisenhower, even on D-Day, was leading himself in many ways and not the hundreds of thousands of forces that were in his command. You're very welcome. Thank you for the questions. How to deal with being angry with incorrectness that you can't do anything about it. Let me unpack this question a little bit. How to deal with being angry with incorrectness. I'm not sure I understand the question completely. If it's anger that's around others being incorrect and you being frustrated with that, I'd invite you to start giving others as much space as possible. All of us, especially in this moment, need additional acreage. And when I'm thinking about this, I'm actually thinking about the petting zoo that I take my daughter to, where the sheep and the horses and the cows have these large pens that they're allowed to sort of roam around. And then when you walk up to them to engage with them, they come over to you, you communicate, you give the cow a pat on the head, and then it returns to its acreage. What I'm trying to get at is that when you have someone who is incorrect, if you find yourself getting frustrated, remember to give them the space they deserve, that they're coming at things from a different perspective, that they're using their diverse mindset, and that you as a leader are responsible for using an inclusive mindset to say, life is not correct or incorrect. There's a huge spectrum of what's possible, and it's your responsibility to be inclusive in that world, to give everyone space and to let everyone sort of roam before they engage with you. Can a desire mislead the path to be a better leader? That's a really deep question, and it's not something I've reflected on. I think a desire that is overcommitted to, that has not been well through, can absolutely mislead you as a leader. It's okay for your desires to change. In fact, I hope your desires do change. Many of us as teenagers probably had a desire to say, well, I hope to go to college. And then you go to college and you have new desires. And then after you get out of college, you get a job and you get new desires. So allow your desires to evolve, allow them to be part of your natural growth. And of course, think about them in a way that says, you know, I'm allowed, I'm authorized, I am the author, I'm the narrator of my story, I am the author of my desires. We can change them. It's very unlikely that we would have a desire that would lead us so far astray that we actually become counterproductive in our professional world, especially if you're taking that step of articulating what your desires are. Tell your mentors, tell your family what your desires are. Say, what do you think about that? Let them be your guide on how a desire lands with others.
Great. Thank you, Adam.
Yeah, no problem, Michelle. I can stop there for sure. There's more, but I love you guys, and I can't get to them all.
Great. Thank you. We definitely appreciate it. This was a very great, and this presentation was super informative, and it seemed like people were really excited about it. I do want to mention that we are also offering the Distinguished Lecture Webinar Series, focusing on technical contents. The next webinar in the Distinguished Lecture Series will be held on the 27th of July at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time on transforming healthcare through AI resolution, presented by Ram Saram. Our next Build Your Career webinar series will be on the 20th of August at 11 Eastern Time on the online presenter by Elsa Velasco-Paul, co-founder of the M&E Group. Registration for these upcoming events are now open. We will be sending you a link to these future events along with the slides and recording of this webinar. Thank you again, everyone, and have a safe and wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.